divided really into two different sides. You've got the master's program where you can go and get a master's in cost analysis, but then you have the other side as well, a continuing education credit side. And that's the side that I teach with a few of my co-instructors, teaching a couple classes on cost analysis, so for your continuing education credits. So there are multiple opportunities if any of you wanted to pursue some time here at AFIT, either as a student or as an instructor. So if you would like more information on that, I'd be glad to speak with you individually. But there are multiple opportunities for you here at AFIT. So what I want to talk to you about for the next 45 minutes is the topic of cost analysis and its importance in today's environment. It's always been important, but much more so given the whole environment of do more without more, trying to cut costs due to limited funds. As we go through this, I'd like this to be an open discussion. I know it's a little difficult from your end without a microphone, but I do encourage you, if at any point during this you want to ask a question or make a comment, I do encourage you to do it right then and there, and certainly we can do this at the end as well. So I'm planning on speaking for about 45 minutes or so, so we'll go from there. Okay, so this is just an overview of what we're going to talk about. We'll look at some DoD cost overruns, define cost analysis, look at why it's important to cost out the entire life cycle cost of a program. And then we'll take a look at two very important elements of a program or of a cost estimate, that being the work breakdown structure and the technical and programmatic baseline. We'll then look at a hot topic in today's environment, that being should cost. Many of you have probably heard of this, so I'll try to add a little more information to it, hopefully stimulate some discussion. And then we'll just take a quick look at the future of cost analysis. So in the past 17 years or so, there have been roughly 74 Nunn-McCurdy breaches, so since 1997, including 47 major defense acquisition programs. If you're not familiar with what a Nunn-McCurdy breach is, it's essentially a breach either of schedule or cost within a program. And just looking at some of the guidelines, it measures your current situation against your current baseline of the program, and it also looks at your current situation compared to the original baseline of the program. The breaches can be classified as either significant or critical. For a significant breach, that constitutes a 15% increase compared to your current baseline, or a 30% increase against your original baseline. So if you have a significant breach, basically it will require notifying Congress of what's going on with the program. A critical breach is a little more important. It constitutes an increase of 25% against your current baseline, or 50% against your original baseline. And in addition to notifying Congress, which you've probably already done when you did a significant breach, this could also involve possible termination of the program, so it's a little more involved. So I say this just to let you know, if you aren't familiar already with what a Nunn-McCurdy breach is, it's a pretty significant problem, if you will, looking at either cost increases or schedule increases against a program. So 74 of these have happened since 1997. So that, among other things, have driven leadership to want to do many things. One of them being to improve the cost analysis efforts that we conduct against a particular program. As you see on the slide, there are multiple programs that have been canceled as a result of these Nunn-McCurdy breaches. You can see them listed there to include the very last one, the VH-71 presidential helicopter replacement. That is President Obama's helicopter, or whoever our current president is in the future. and this program was actually canceled. It's currently trying to come back under some different, more restrictive guidelines. But you can see here that nothing is exempt from being canceled, not even the president's helicopter. So some pretty significant stuff. There are many factors that have been cited for these recent cost overruns. You can see them all listed here. If you look at the fourth from the left, you'll see revised estimates of being responsible for 38 of the 74 non-McCurdy breaches that have happened. So in part of those 78 programs, revised estimates have been part of the cause for why the breach occurred. And then you can see the other ones listed there as to why the breaches occurred.
From USA Jobs.
So cost estimating defined. Okay, well, essentially it's the process of collecting historical cost, schedule, and programmatic information, and then applying all of that data to estimating a future program. And it's trying to predict the future based on today's knowledge of what has happened in the past. So that's essentially what cost estimating is. Pretty simple, but there's quite a few details that go into actually conducting cost estimating. There's really 5 main steps in the cost estimating process. First, really the most important of the steps is the definition and planning. This is where you're going to define what you're going to estimate. You're going to review the scope of what you're going to estimate. So this is where your entire programmatic estimate, your cost estimate, will be defined. So this will set the stage for every step that happens afterwards. The next step, data collection. This is where you're going to go out and collect data on all of your historical programs, and then you'll use that data to do step 3, which is actually formulate the estimate for the new program. Once you come up with your estimate, you'll then do some reviews and some presentations. You always have to present your estimate to leadership, whether it be your program director or individuals further up the chain, to include SecDef himself in some cases. Finally, you're going to have final documentation. This is where, one point I do want to make, you're going to be documenting your estimate throughout the entire cost analysis process. However, there's going to be some documentation that definitely occurs right at the end, whether it be in the form of a blue book, which is essentially a comprehensive cost estimate of your program, or something titled something else. But final documentation will really wrap up the entire cost estimation process. Just some characteristics of good cost estimates. They may be pretty straightforward, but it needs to be accurate. The best representation of the item that's being costed out, so the best representation that you can come up with at any given time. It needs to be comprehensive, so that means cradle to grave. Include all the costs from the very inception of a program to its termination and disposal. You need to include all of that because we need to know what we're in store for regarding the cost of a program. Finally, a cost estimate should be replicable and auditable. So that means if another competent cost analyst is looking at your program, they should be able to look at the data that you came up with and replicate your cost estimate. That's all part of the documentation process as well. So, and then auditable, it's kind of the same thing. You need to be able to go in and make sure what you did makes sense, and it can create an audit track. I mentioned the cradle to grave concept, starting with our research and development costs all the way through disposal. Just need to make sure you estimate for all of them. Don't leave anything out, because costs will not end when the item is fielded. You have your operations and sustainment costs, the cost to actually run the thing, and then finally the boneyard cost, what it's going to cost to get rid of that item or to store it, whatever you need to do. And again, this helps us understand the entire cost of the project up front. So we'll start off looking at the work breakdown structure. This is a very important element for your cost estimate and really acts as the backbone for the entire program. It is a product-oriented family tree, meaning that basically the work breakdown structure is going to list out every single element of your program. It's going to start at the very summary level. Say if you're costing out an airplane, maybe airplane will be the very top level, and then it's going to break it down from there. You may have fuselage as your second level, engine, what have you. It's basically a product-oriented listing that's going to break out every single element for your program, and that's how you're going to tie your cost estimates to. So you're going to estimate for every single element on your work breakdown structure. The work breakdown structure is not going to be static. It's going to actually evolve as your system matures. So as you get more and more of a description for your system, your work breakdown structure will evolve. So just know it's not going to be the same, probably won't be the same from beginning to end. Some guidance documents for your work breakdown structure. There's really two. The DI Management 81334D outlines how to actually prepare your work breakdown structure, so it goes into excruciating detail what to put on each line, how to actually structure your work breakdown structure, etc. So that is really your guidebook for how to put together your work breakdown structure. Next is your Mill Standard 881C. The cover page of the document is on the right-hand side there. This is essentially a document that provides 12 or so reference appendices for each commodity that you're trying to perform a cost estimate on. So the point here is you're not alone. You don't have to create a work breakdown structure from scratch. This document, Mill Standard 881C, will provide those appendices for you so that you can use one of those appendices as the starting point for your program. It's going to list out the starting skeleton or backbone for how your WBS should look, and then you can modify it from there. But the point here is just to know you're not alone. If you need to create a cost estimate, go to Mill Standard 881C, and that will give you the starting point for how to actually do it. Any questions so far? Talking about what we've covered leading up through work breakdown structure. Okay.
No questions so far, sir. We're good to go.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Okay. So next, we'll take a look at this thing called a technical and programmatic baseline. Essentially, what this is all the system attributes required so that you or me as a cost analyst can actually produce a realistic and credible cost estimate. So it's a document, or it's something that lists everything related to your program. It could have to do with size parameters, weight, just anything related to your program. All of that's going to go in this technical and programmatic baseline. It may be found in a card or a cost analysis requirements description or a card-like document. Not all programs will have a card, so you may just need to find what document they're using to capture their technical and programmatic baseline elements. But each program should have something like this, and that's going to form the basis for your cost estimate. So it's essentially the program manager's responsibility to come up with this technical and programmatic baseline, but it's the cost analyst's responsibility to make sure that everything in that baseline is reasonable. So say you were a cost estimator, you're going to take a look at that baseline and make sure everything is reasonable, to include sizing. You're going to look at such things like has growth been applied to certain aspects of the program. If we saw growth in historical programs, So are we accounting for potential growth in the program? Is the baseline heritage input reasonable? Heritage has to do with how similar your current program that you're estimating for is how similar is it to prior programs. So we want to make sure that, that the heritage input is reasonable as well. Want to make sure that all complexity and integration risks have been determined. You know, we're not just assuming the best case scenario in the baseline. We're assuming a realistic scenario. So we want to make sure all those elements have been included. We also want to look at the planned schedule. Is the schedule consistent with what we have seen in our analogous programs, and does it incorporate normal schedule challenges that we've seen in the past as well? So you or me as a cost analyst, we just need to take a look at this baseline and make sure it's reasonable, looking at all these factors here to help us out. So when we're actually conducting our cost estimate, there are 5 main methodologies, if you will, for how we actually do come up with a cost estimate. The analogy method typically occurs early in programs, and it references a single data point. So for instance, if you don't have much information at all to go on, and you're estimating for a, let's say a refueling aircraft, well, you may look at the cost estimate for a refueling aircraft in the past. That's all you have to go on. So that's essentially what the analogy methodology is, looking at a single data point, single historical data point. The second one, parametric, is essentially going to look at multiple data points, and this is where you're going to come up with your cost estimating relationships. It may be, you know, as the horsepower increases on your vehicle, that's going to drive cost a certain way. And so there's different equations that can be produced to help you out here, to say, you know, as you increase in horsepower, your cost will drive up accordingly. But that's essentially what a cost estimating relationship is, and those are used in what we refer to as the parametric methodology. Next, looking at the engineering methodology, this is essentially a bottoms-up or a grassroots method of calculating costs. It takes a look at the lowest levels of a program and calculates the cost from there, and then rolls up those costs to arrive at a total program level. Actual cost, this tends to occur later in programs because what it does, it actually uses the actual cost for your current program that you're estimating for, and then extrapolates those costs in a sense. So that is a cost estimating methodology as well. Finally, we have expert opinion. Now this is essentially asking your expert, whether it be an engineer, a logistician, whoever, just asking them, hey, what does this thing cost? And then they'll give you their estimate. That's essentially what's called using expert opinion. We sometimes use expert opinion as a cross-check. Cross-check basically means that while you may use one estimating methodology, say analogy, parametric, whatever, to come up with your cost estimate, we will also try to estimate that same element using a different methodology, say the expert opinion method. It's a cross-check. It's a second check, if you will, to make sure that your estimate using your original methodology is reasonable. So just like a double check to make sure you're in the right ballpark with estimating the thing that you are. So looking at the 5 different methodologies, this is typically where you would see the methodologies used for any given program. This certainly isn't definite, but you can see you would typically see analogy being used earlier in a program, parametric as a program progresses, then engineering, and then actuals at the end, with expert opinion being used throughout the entire program. So any questions so far for technical programmatic baseline or anything we've talked about so far? Okay.
No questions yet.
Okay.
I think the active shooter exercise got him scared.
Sounds great. Okay. Um, so looking at the next topic then, that being will cost and should cost. Hopefully a lot of you have heard of this. It formally began about 4 years ago, this whole idea should cost. But if you have not heard of it yet, you will be hearing about it because it's one of the big buzzes in program offices today. Essentially what the concept of will cost and should cost is, it's a two-tiered cost, funding, and management approach when you come up with your cost estimates, and it uses two separate cost estimates for your program. The will cost estimate is what's referred to as a non-advocate estimate, and it's going to be used for your budgeting and programming purposes. The will cost estimate is what is what do you think the true cost of your effort is going to be? Not looking at not assuming various efficiencies and stuff like that. So given history, what is the true cost of your program? So that's the first estimate. And then the second estimate is the thing called a should cost estimate. And this is where the program manager looks at a program, looks at that will cost estimate, and says, where can I find efficiencies? How can I do business better? How can I save money? He or she records these efficiencies down, and then that hopefully will drive costs down in certain areas. And so what you end up with is a cost estimate that is less than your will cost estimate. And then the whole idea behind this is that the program manager will then try to work towards their should cost estimate, thus saving money off their original will cost estimate. So that's the whole idea behind this, really trying to find efficiencies maybe over and above what you've been the program manager has been doing all along. So that is should cost. I think we covered the majority of these. Will cost estimate. One more point to note here is that typically a will cost estimate will be what's referred to as your 55 to 65% confidence level, or the mean of historical costs. So if you think of your cost curve, that's essentially what we're saying, is looking at historical programs, your will cost estimate will be between 55 and 65% confidence level. So you're 55 to 65% sure that the cost for your current program will fall within this range. That's essentially what we're talking about here. And the will cost estimate is typically prepared by an independent entity, so someone outside of the program office chain of command. And you do that because you tend to get away from maybe different biases or the concept of owning a program or favoring a program. You're getting the true estimate when you're talking about a will cost estimate. The second piece is the should cost, and I think we covered the majority of these things here on this slide. It is designed to drive productivity improvements in our programs. So what can we do better to save costs? Do more without more. And that's reflected in the should cost estimate. Okay, so a few things what should cost is not. It's not just arbitrary challenges by management to reduce cost. So if your program manager says, well, I want to reduce cost by 10%, mark it down. That's not what should cost isn't. So arbitrary percentages, arbitrary dollar amounts, that's not what should cost is. Utilizing a lower confidence level from your will cost estimate range. So should cost is not saying, well, I'm gonna go ahead and use the estimate that's at the 35% confidence level. It's just not realistic. It's not what should cost is designed to be. Got a couple bullets down here at the bottom. Anything requiring significant investment and anything requiring an increase to the budget. Well, that's sort of true. At the same time, we need to look at the big picture. So if the investment or increase to the budget outweighs the cost it's going to take to actually get that investment or increase to the budget, then we might do it. And of course, that would involve ramping or talking, getting approval up your chain of command in order to get more funding. But we certainly don't want to rule out those things. If something requires an investment or increase to the budget, we want to consider those as well. So where does should cost come from? Well, as I mentioned back in 2010, it started with these things called better buying power initiatives. You may be familiar with them. If not, you're probably going to hear about them more and more as you get into your program offices more and more. But essentially, it started in 2010, and it has tended to evolve since then. But essentially, these better buying power memos involve 7 different initiatives, essentially just trying to answer the question, how do we do more without more? And when we talk about should cost, that falls underneath the second initiative, which I have highlighted here, controlling costs throughout the product life cycle. That is where should cost falls. So it started formally back in 2010, and we'll see how it has evolved since then. In 2011, Dr. Carter put out a memo, Should Cost and Affordability, that essentially described the difference between the terms affordability and should cost. Affordability decisions tend to happen earlier in a program, or maybe even before the program starts to begin with. It answers the question, how much technology can we afford? How much firepower, how much of an item can we afford? And it's the amount of technology that's put in an item really is driven by what we can pay. So it starts earlier in the process. Should cost, on the other hand, tends to occur post milestone B in a program. So a little bit later as the program is evolving. And it's focused on controlling costs, and it focuses on these things called stretch goals. Again, stretch goals tend to look at the program manager and how they perceive being able to find savings in the future for certain elements of the program. So in November of 2012, we arrived at this thing called Better Buying Power 2.0. So again, this is just another evolution of the Better Buying Power process. And all this did, it kind of adapted with a changing of the times. It looked at, since 2010, since we first started applying these Better Buying Power initiatives, what has worked, what hasn't worked. So it took all of those lessons learned and rolled them into this Better Buying Power 2.0. It talked more about should cost based management, what we can do to try to find efficiencies, and maybe what has not worked, so something we may want to stay away from. So it's another evolution in the whole better buying power process. So what we've got now is a should cost example. This came to us from the F-22 program office. It was highlighted in Better Buying Power 2.0, and we actually had the pleasure of having the CFO for the F-22 program office come and speak at one of the classes that we teach, that being QMT 490. We had her come and speak on really what happened with the F-22 program. How do they implement should cost? Why is it such a success that is being highlighted in Better Buying Power? So that's what we have here. It's just one of the key success stories that we've seen over the last 4 years. So essentially, the F-22 SPO, based on the should cost initiatives that they conducted, have realized they took a look at their increment 3.2A, which is a software upgrade essentially, and they realized about a 15% efficiency in the short term, and then based on their should cost initiatives, they're expecting to realize a potential of 12% efficiency in the longer term, and it's going to turn out to be about $32 million in projected savings, both in the short term and the long term. So, in the grand scheme of things, that's not a huge dollar amount, but when we're talking about should cost, well, anything helps, and $32 million is a decent chunk of change for anybody. Some of the details of what they actually did in the F-22 program office. Again, this just kind of describes what the Inc. 3.2A was about, mainly changes software. But when you look at the should cost process that they went through, essentially what they did is they met with the contractor and they determined ways of better doing business. Now the contractor had to buy in with what they were doing, which I guess that's currently in the process of happening, but the contractor is actually changing their processes for future increments of the F-22, which will result in future savings down the line. But these are essentially the 4 steps that the F-22 program office went through. The first was data gathering, then model development, data inputs, then they analyzed the data that they collected, and then they implemented all the results that they saw. We'll go into each of these here shortly. The first step, that being data gathering. To put this in context, just realize this is where the program office actually met with the contractor office. They had their initial familiarization meeting. They exchanged data. They then reviewed each other's responses, so reviewed the data that each of them provide one to the other. They asked questions and then continued to analyze it. So this is where the actual meeting with the contractor took place. So once they had all of the data, they then took a look at 2 of the cost estimates. The first being referred to as the baseline model, or your will cost estimate, and then the second being the should cost model. This is where they have found these efficiencies or expected these efficiencies. So they essentially compared those 2 models, highlighted the differences, and then focused on those to try to actually make those possible should cost initiatives a reality. So that was step 2, actually developing the model and taking a look at that, reviewing the data inputs. Step 3, they did a series of cross-checks on their should cost estimate. A number of things. Some involve bottoms-up estimates, the engineering of the grassroots. They did some parametric modeling, and then top-down or analogy estimates. So this is where they did their cross-checks to answer the question of, hey, we have this should cost estimate, we think, is it realistic? So this is where they actually did the cross-checks to determine whether it's realistic or not. So once they then step 4, they actually implemented the results that they saw. So you can see in the bar on the left, the initial baseline cost for Inc. 3.2A was $212 million. The should cost, assuming all of the initiatives would come through, would be about $180 million. So that's where you get your projected savings of about $32 million, both in the short term and the long term. And then you can see the 2% deductions or reductions up at the top, 15% in the short term, 12% in the long term. In the short term, the savings mainly came from a number of things to include maybe some overestimations that originally happened, so they went through and cleaned up some of those. They also had a few areas where there were incorrect basis of estimates. So they went through and cleaned those up, made them a little more realistic. In some areas there was improper scope that was being advertised for the program. And then excessive fees, whether it be from the contractor or somewhere else. They went through and really cleaned those up and made sure they were all realistic. Then looking at the longer term savings, these are going to be driven by structural process improvements, both within the program office and at the contractor's plants. So it's going to require the contractors to actually improve their operations, which they're in the process of doing. But it's really changing the mindset of how they're doing business. That's where we're going to see the longer term savings. And so, as I stated, it affects not only Inc. 32A, but it should affect further increments of the F-22 down the line. This is just a further breakout of where they actually found their efficiencies from. Different work effort modifications and different organizational restructurings, productivity improvements, process improvements. Again, we talked about some of these, but it just goes into a little more detail regarding where they estimate their savings to come from. So again, in total, looking at 12 to 27% savings between the will cost estimate and the should cost estimate. So pretty good, pretty significant. Just a further depiction, you can see on the left side of this graph, roughly 27% of the savings broken out between 15% and 12%. But you also have, to the right side of this dotted line, it talks about potential other savings as well, to the tune of maybe 18% of their total costs. And this is potential. It's going to be dependent upon certain things such as contractor rate restructuring, general and administrative cost savings, and possibly proposal prep savings. So costs, when we speak to the contractor and try to get them to improve their processes, these are costs that may fall out as a result of that. So we can potentially see an additional 18% of a decrease in cost from the will cost to the should cost estimate. So going from left to right, we start at the proposal baseline. You can see the different increments of savings that could happen as a result of these efficiencies due to should cost initiatives, to arrive at your potential could cost. What this thing could actually cost should all the should cost savings be realized. Oops. One point to note on this is that to the left of the dotted line, there's more of a higher confidence that these savings will be realized. A lot of those savings are within the program office control. It's something that they can actually control, so there tends to be higher confidence that these savings will actually be realized. On the right side of the line, these are things outside of the program office's control, but possibly something that they can influence. So savings that we can realize based on our influences. So there tends to be a little bit of a lower confidence that these savings will actually be realized. The 18% will actually be realized, but it's possible based on our should cost analysis. It's possible we could realize those savings. So a summary of the F-22 should cost effort. It's deemed a success story. It's highlighted in Better Buying Power 2.0. Really any dollar saved over and above the cost that it takes to save those dollars is going to be deemed a success when we look at should cost. And F-22 certainly is representative of that. But they took a look and they identified their savings both in the short term and in the long term identified potentially how much could be saved. And then they identified the areas to improve upon in the longer term, so that savings could be realized not only on the Inc. 32A effort, but on subsequent efforts as well. So this is certainly deemed a success story. You can read about this on all over the Better Buying Power website. And I have more information here that I can certainly discuss with you if you're more interested in more of the details. But F22 Inc. 32A certainly recognized as a showcased success story for should cost. They also had some lessons learned, looking at their should cost efforts and taking a look at the future. So lessons learned, what they should look at in the future. The should cost analysis definitely needs to be a coordinated effort between the program management and the engineering teams. Neither side can do it by themselves. It needs to be a coordinated effort, and then it needs to be supported by both the cost analysis and the contracting communities. So again, everybody's all in here. Nobody can do it by themselves. In order to truly realize these should cost savings, everybody on the program management and the contractors team has to work together. What the program office also realized is it's best or most efficient to bring in or to ensure that you have a multifunctional team of technical experts. So you actually have the experts for each of the processes that are reviewing the contractor's processes and operations. So as best as you can, you want to make sure you have the individuals there working on this who truly know both the ins and outs of not only the program management office, but the contractors' processes and operations as well. And then finally, the cost savings won't be fully realized if the initiatives that they're coming up with now are not incorporated into future contracts. So if you remember that 18% that we're talking about, that assumes that all of the initiatives that they're looking at now are going to be implemented and implemented by the contractor and incorporated in order to change their processes. So if that doesn't happen, savings won't be realized. And finally, contractor buy-in is a must, as you probably realize, in order to make these things happen. So these are some of the lessons learned that the F22 program office came up with as they were going through their should cost effort. Okay, so that takes us up through Better Buying Power 2.0. What's the future look like? Well, they're already working on Better Buying Power 3.0. And essentially this is going to be not more the same, but I mean it's going to take what we've learned to date and it's going to roll it in so that we can talk about those experiences and possibly refine our recommendations for the future. But it's going to be called Better Buying Power 3.0. It's going to be focused more and more on providing more value for both the warfighter or the government and the taxpayer. But it also wants to take a look at both sides, both the government side and the contractor side. Provide those incentives so that it's a win-win situation for both of us. Better value for the government and higher profit for the contractor. So that will essentially be what makes Better Buying Power work, or should cost initiatives work, is when you're actually working with the contractor, the individual who can affect their processes or their operations to lower costs ultimately. I kind of touched on this, but what are the metrics of success when we're talking should cost? Well, you may think it's large. We have to save a lot of money in order for should cost to be successful, but essentially what it is really even the smallest number of smallest percentage of programs or contracts executing below their budget each year. If we just have a little bit of savings over what it costs to achieve those savings, should cost is deemed a success. And that's the entire reason should cost is put in place at all, is to try to get away from arriving at the will cost estimate or even exceeding that will cost estimate. Just trying to find little instances of savings wherever you might be able to. Finding better ways of doing business, trying to do more without more. So just a few cost estimating challenges that that I've seen, and that cost estimators will preach that these are really the main areas that they have problems with. Lack of data. When we're looking at historical programs, either the data just doesn't exist, so it never happened, or we didn't properly file it away so that we can reference it in the future. Regardless where it's stored. But you will see that every cost estimator will preach that lack of data, lack of historical data is one of their main challenges. I know there's multiple initiatives that are going on right now to try to fix this up at the DoD level to try to capture data from these previous programs so that any cost analyst can go to a specific website or a specific database to be able to try to pull some of this data. But that's a big thing, is the lack of data. Second, as you may imagine, it's difficult to quantify various alternatives. You know, this may or may not be the case in all of them, but when you're looking at going with one program versus another one, or one type of technology versus another one, it may be difficult to quantify those different alternatives. So that's a problem that you'll see as well. And finally, kind of where I come into play, is a lack of training or education historically that we've seen. Actually training or educating people to be cost analysts, to do cost analysis. Historically, this has been a problem. I think they're getting better with it now. When you look at the different certification requirements that we all have to do to include cost analysts. There's a new emphasis on the cost analysis certification, that being the DWIA-CE, Defense Acquisition Workforce Improvement Act, cost estimating. That's an actual certification that we as cost analysts need to get. In the past, it was just the APDP FM certification, financial management certification. They didn't break down being a budget analyst versus being a cost analyst. It was just financial management. So that was in the past. But now what you're seeing is more of a specialty type education for cost analysis. So DWIA-CE certainly emphasizes that. And it appears that the training and education that we as cost analysts are required to get is improving. At this point, you know, I want to open it up for questions and discussion. We've pretty much covered the points that I wanted to cover. I felt were important for this. So at this time, I'll turn it over to you, and please fire away your questions, comments.
Yes, sir.
If I heard him correctly.
Sound off so I can hear you. You don't have to stand, just project.
They said stand up.
No, just sound off. Speak loudly.
If I heard him correctly, do you have to get certification for the FM, and you have to have certification for a cost analyst? Those two separate certifications they have to have?
Yeah, I think I got the question. It has to do with certification and what you actually need. No, I think we're going away from APDP FM. So for those of us who have been in the field quite a while, we may have already received that APDP certification, APDP-FM certification, but now what you guys are probably seeing, a lot of you, is just looking at the DWIA certification. I think you've got a, whatever the budgeting track is, but within DWIA, if you're, and it depends on your job. If your job has to do more with budgeting, you will take the DWIA budgeting track, whereas if you are sitting on a cost analyst position, you will follow the DWIA-CE track, cost estimating track. That's what you're required to do, but your position will dictate that. So it's really an either or going forth, whether your budget or cost. Does that answer what you were looking for?
Yes, that answered his question. Thank you. In a previous session, some of our students had a question how cost analysis is different on the operations and maintenance side of the house as opposed to the acquisition side of the house.
Well, I mean, there aren't really any. I mean, there are differences, but again, you're looking at on the acquisition side of the house, you're really looking how much will a program cost to to build a, how much will it cost to procure a plane or whatever you're looking at. So you're looking at historical data. I think with operations and maintenance, it's essentially the same thing. You're looking at historical data, what it takes to actually operate and maintain the item that you're looking at. So you still need to come up with a cost estimate to support actually operating and maintaining that item. So when you look at the fundamentals of cost analysis, it's not that different. You're still doing the cost estimate. You're still choosing one or more of the 5 methodologies. It's not that different. It's just the of course O&M is typically going to be 3,400 funds. So you might see from year to year, if it's the like say you're on the A10 program and you need to do a cost estimate from year 1 to year 2. You're going to take a look at your mission. If you know your mission is similar to you're sitting in year 2 or you're getting ready to come up to year 2, and you know what your mission was for year 1, you know what your costs were for year 1. You may use those costs in year 1 as a baseline for year 2, applying inflation or something like that. So from my perspective, I don't think it's that different. It's just maybe the tools that we use to report the cost estimates are going to be different, but the actual methodologies that we use and the process we think through in order to come up with the cost estimates, I don't think they're all that different.
We have one question in the back.
In one of your earlier slides, you did show that the cost estimate should be done by someone else.
Ben, I didn't quite. Ben, I didn't quite.
Speak up a little bit louder. So in one of the previous slides, it mentioned that the cost estimate has to be done by someone outside of the organization. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, this has to do with objectivity, really. Within you have independent cost estimating teams. Within the Air Force, we have AFCA, the Air Force Cost Analysis Agency. They fall directly underneath Headquarters Air Force, so they're not tied to a particular program. They will typically, what you'll see is you'll have when a program is coming up for review, whether it be a milestone review or something that requires a decision by leadership regarding what to do with a program. You're going to see two different cost estimates happen. One will be the program office cost estimate, and second will be the cost estimate that's produced by the independent entity. In the Air Force, it's AFCA. So those two estimates, the two teams will then reconcile the two estimates, and you'll ultimately arrive at one single estimate that will go forth. But what it is, you know, the assumption's made that a lot of people in a program office, whether you mean to or not, you're kind of tied to your program, so you may show preference for your program. You want the program to succeed. So maybe in some cases, whether you intend to or not, you may estimate a little more favorably for certain aspects. I think program managers we tend to see that program managers are maybe a little more vulnerable to this because they want the program to succeed. We as the cost analysts need to maintain objectivity as best we can, but even a cost analyst that's tied to the program, if you directly support a program, you may tend to, your costs will be influenced by you wanting to ensure the program succeeds. Whereas AFCA and these independent entities will actually come in, they're not tied to the program, so they've got really nothing to lose should they say that a program may not be achieved at its best case. They're looking at, okay, what's the most realistic thing that's going to happen with that program, and that's where they're deriving their estimate. So really, when we're talking will cost, that's where it's really to maintain the object. Give me a second. My computer just shut. Okay, I'm sorry about that. My computer just shut down. So when we're talking about will cost, the principle here is just to maintain that objectivity as much as we can in the cost estimate. So that's where when I mentioned and somebody outside of the program office will be creating this estimate, that's what I was referring to. You're certainly going to be having people within the program come up with an estimate, those that are directly supporting that program, but you also will have somebody outside of the program coming up with an estimate as well. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir, that did answer the question. Any other questions from the group?
Just have a question.
Okay.
You brought up the F-22 with regards, I guess there were some cost savings there. And I guess my question is, with the cost savings, was there a loss of capability? One of your examples was Link 16 or JTIDS MIDS. But the aircraft doesn't have a receive capability. It just has, I mean, the aircraft has a receive capability, but it doesn't have a back into that architecture. So, I mean, were there losses of capability? At the savings and cost?
As far as I know, there was no loss in capability. I mean, I'm sure the F-22 folks would be able to answer that better, but I'm pretty sure there was no loss in capability. All the again, that's not what should cost is about. Should cost is about finding efficiencies with the way we're doing business, different ways of actually reducing costs while at the same time maintaining the capability. If you remember the discussion on affordability, that is where the loss in capability would apply more. Earlier in the program, looking at affordability. So how much capability can we afford? That would be an affordability discussion. Whereas looking at should cost, no, I don't believe there was any loss in capability. It's solely about finding efficiencies, finding better ways to do business, finding better ways to do more without more, to get where we need to go at a reduced cost. So just to answer in short, I'm pretty sure there was no loss in capability here.
We have one question from the group captain from Pakistan.
So my question is this, that in your early slides, you mentioned that number of programs were cancelled. And I would like to know that what was the main reason behind cancellation of these programs, and how in future we can avoid that such programs must not be cancelled.
So his question was regarding, you mentioned the number of programs that were canceled. He was curious if you had any sort of justification for why those programs were canceled.
None of my slides here. I do know it was various reasons. If slide 4, there were a number of things that we mentioned. Well, first of all, it stemmed from non-McCurdy breaches. So before these programs were canceled, there was one or more non-McCurdy breaches that actually occurred first. And those non-McCurdy breaches were due to a number of factors. It could be engineering design issues. Maybe there was something wrong or something that wasn't captured when we initially looked at the design of the program. Could be schedule issues, quantity changes, revised estimates. I'm just going down the list of what was listed on that chart. So I don't have any specifics for those individual programs. Now I believe the data is available because I pulled this directly out of a GAO audit. I think it was in 2011. So I've got that information. I believe it's listed. I just don't have it in here. But it was the program stemmed from the non-McCurdy breaches that happened as a result of one of those 9 or 10 factors that I listed previously. So then as a result, the decision was made by Congress to go ahead and cancel a program or to not fund a program, mainly because the schedule or the cost had been breached so much, and it just appeared to be cost prohibitive to go forward with that program. I guess we screwed up enough in the past that there's really no hope, or it was going to be too costly to try to fix it in the future. So I know that's more of a general answer rather than giving you specifics for each one, but they all have to do with cost overruns and schedule overruns that ultimately happen on each of those programs. And I think you had a question or a comment about how do we fix this in the future. Well, that gets back to the whole idea of I think there's a number of ways to fix it in the future. One of those being the better buying power initiatives that we're all trying to implement now, trying to do better cost analysis, trying to actively implement some of these should cost initiatives. From a cost analyst perspective, the way we can affect it is by trying to not only reduce the costs that we see for a particular program, but also coming up with realistic costs. It's certainly not going to help things if we come up with a cost that's minimal for a program over the course of its life cycle, but as the years unfold, and we find it's going to cost much more than what we originally budgeted for, that's certainly not going to help things. So we're trying to come up with the accurate cost up front so that we can come up, Congress and other DoD leadership can determine whether they actually want to fund a program or not, knowing how much it's going to cost. If we start getting it right up front, ultimately that should lead to less problems down the road, aka less non-McCurdy breaches, whether it be for schedule issues or cost issues. Does that answer what you were looking for, sir?
Yes, thank you very much. With that, any final comments, questions from anyone? All right, Major Borchers, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule in order to enlighten us. We appreciate the time and effort that you put into the presentation. Any final remarks before we cut you off?
Guys, I just want to say thank you very much for this opportunity. I hope you got as much from it as I hope you did. These are certainly important concepts going forward, regardless how well I presented them to you. So I hope you got a lot out of this, and I certainly welcome your feedback to try to improve this in the future to deliver to you guys what you truly need in the future. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and enjoy your rest of your time down there.